All right, so we are picking up where we left off in our discussion of why young adults leave the church and what we can do about it, what we might even do to address this situation. This is something that came up in a discussion a couple of weeks ago in class. So last week we started by looking at a survey done by Lifeway Research that talked about some of the reasons that young adults say they have walked away from the church. We talked about some of the numbers. 2/3 of people 18 to 30 in this survey, over 2/3, had at some point or another walked away from church for at least a year. People who had gone regularly, people who had been regularly a part of the church before that. So we looked at some of that last week. I sent that document to you last week. So if you weren't here and you'd like to go back over that, feel free. If you can't find it in your email, in your inbox or your trash or wherever it is, let me know and I'll send it back. I'll send it to you again. This week, I want to start by looking at just some results. I don't have the nice little charts and graphs like I had last time, but I did put together a quick PowerPoint just so you can see the things that I'm talking about. I'm looking at I've been looking at some research done by Barna for a book that came out several years ago called You Lost Me. Now, I think I might have mentioned this book last week. In fact, I know I did, by David Kennedy. And it's a few years old now, but not all that old. And it's the results of some of this research. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in this and want to do a little more reading on it, take a look at this book. It kind of intersperses some data that Barna came up with in some of their studies with quotes from young adults who took these surveys, who were in this research, and some of their thoughts and some of the things they said directly. So you might find that interesting and kind of helpful. But I'm just going to go over the 6 main reasons that Barna says the young adults in his study had walked away from church. And now you're going to see some overlap. It wasn't exactly the same parameters. I think he started like at 15 instead of 18, but you'll see some overlap in some of the reasons. And I just want to walk through these. And if you have anything you want to say, please say it. With the screen share up, I can't see everybody, so just yell if you want to say something, and just come right out with it. That's fine. So in Barna's research for You Lost Me, they discovered that nearly 3 of every 5 young Christians disconnect either permanently or for an extended period of time from the church after age 15. So again, the numbers are somewhat similar to the 2/3 from Lifeway. These are the reasons that they gave. And again, I'm going to walk through them. I'm going to make a few comments. Please feel free to chime in and see what you think about these, and see what kind of maybe questions come up in your mind, or things you'd like to talk about. Reason number 1. The first reason is given is the church is overprotective. The comment that I saw here, the church is a creativity killer, where risk-taking and being involved in culture are anathema. One of the things that strikes me about this is young adults in our world, all adults in our world, but young adults in our world particularly, have just open access to ideas, to worldviews, to differing and conflicting ways of seeing the world and perspectives. And they push back against the idea that the world is something that they need to be protected from. They want to connect. But according to this research, a lot of their experience of Christianity feels like it is stifling for them. It's fear-based. It's averse to any risks or any getting out there in the world. Almost 25% said that Christians demonize everything outside the church, and talked about how things like ignoring the problems of the real world and being resistant to music and movies and culture, popular culture that's a part of that world. And that this was a factor in their walking away. Now, later on, I want us to, maybe this class, maybe the next class, I want us to talk more specifically about some responses to some of this. But please feel free, if you have some responses, I can even sort of work those in coming weeks as we continue to walk through some of this. If you have thoughts about that reason or not.
Are those supposed to be equivalent? An attitude towards movies and other popular aspects of the culture are supposed to be indicative of a larger attitude towards interacting with culture around us at all.
So Matt just said, are the concerns about movies and music supposed to be the same thing as concern with interacting with the world overall? In other words, what he's asking is,
because if those are the prime examples used to support that larger statement, then that's indicative of an incredible view of what our culture is. I would say.
Well, I think the more specific reason given here is the overprotectivity of the church, and overprotectivity, is that a word? the tendency to overprotect by discouraging young adults from being connected with the larger world. And again, these are just tendencies now. This is not to say this is everybody's experience. This is every church. This is just the general response that these surveys were generating. I don't think those things were necessarily equivalent. Just a facet of it, just a part of it. One of the ways that these respondents perceived that the church was telling them they shouldn't be connected to the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Patrick, I think that on this one, I think most people can understand just inertia, right? Whenever you have an institution, there's this built-in, no matter what, in almost any institution, there's a built-in resistance to change.
Yeah.
And so that's there. But I think what you said about fear, I think the church, at least in some church groups, there is a fundamental fear that if we change, we might offend God, or we're not sure, and so we don't rely on that we have a loving Father and we're doing our best, and we don't take risks, which is odd which is completely understandable. It's not odd, but when you look at Jesus,
right,
he took risks all the time, right? He pushed the established thing. He ate with sinners. He did all sorts of things that we won't. Jesus goes to Pharisees' houses, but that doesn't mean, the church has always said, well, but I don't want to see a Christian in a bar. It's that that may be what people are getting to. We aren't nimble at dealing with culture. And it is a shame that we are sometimes so afraid. I don't think God, if the intent is right, I think God's grace is going to cover us if we're trying to do what he wants. I mean, we obviously have to look at it, but to not be completely guided by the fact that they didn't do it before, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think some fair questions that come out of this that come up for me is, you know, does faith require us to be removed from the world to function? Does faith require us to be immersed in the world? And as you look at Jesus, I was shocked. I was kind of looking at this, and I hadn't really paid attention to this before. But the Gospel of John, over and over again, talks about Jesus coming into the world, which is really interesting. I mean, it's there like 10, 15 times. There's these references to Jesus coming into the world. And how then, you know, he prays for his disciples. You talked about the grace of God covering us. Jesus prays for his disciples, you know, who are in the world. You know, I prayed for those of mine who are in the world. You know, he's not talking about lost and erring Christians. He's talking about his disciples. And so yeah, I think some reasonable questions that come up from this. And even if, at the same time, I think we can acknowledge that there are, you know, we all protect our children from things, right? When our children are growing up, we all protect them from things. There are things that we have to protect kids from, particularly. But we're talking here about young adults, right? We're talking here about people who in every other aspect of their lives are turning outward toward the world. And
something. Oh,
go ahead, Colette.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me about young adults, or really generally the world, when we were looking at it, the church doesn't do a good job at modeling inclusivity. And I think that gives a picture of that we're stiff-necked and unwilling to understand people, or we say, come as you are to the church. But if people really did come as they are to the church, I wonder how, I know how we have responded to that as a whole. It's so this whole idea of inclusivity, this whole idea of accepting people as they are, it's like raising children. You can say all you want of what they should and shouldn't do, but if it's not modeled, of course, they're not going to know how to do it. And I think we have not been very good at including all people and their differences, be it socioeconomically, race, be it educational levels, and not to speak of if you're a young adult, you have been thrust into a world that if you've gone to college or even if you're in a high school, you have to learn how to get along with everybody, and to then feel like the other is not brought in can certainly fit into what we're talking about here. A lack of flexibility, a lack of just welcoming all people.
I came across something a few months ago. If your organization, specifically not church, if your organization isn't at least as diverse as the classrooms they grew up in, young adults are going to ask some questions about your organization. I think that's a really interesting statement, a really interesting thought. And I think there's some truth to it, you know. This line about the church being a creativity killer has been sort of in my mind bugging me. I don't want us to be creativity killers, right? I want us to be places where people can use their creativity and can see it as a gift from God, and we see it as a gift from God, and whatever field that is, I think we have some thinking to do about that. If that's true, that's a striking comment to me, a striking phrase to me. The church is a creativity killer.
Ironically, that's not a creative statement. Because maybe sensing a certain group of people around you in one particular congregation that's resistant one particular idea that you in the church is sculpting creativity.
So yeah, so I mean that's true, of course. Listen, all of this is subjective. None of this is subjective, and all of it is simply the response of this group of people. It's not set in stone, but the fact that these answers come up often in these surveys should make us say, huh, now maybe there's something there. The only experience most of us have of the church, you know, big is the local church. That's the only experience most of us have. And it's easy to say, yeah, well, you know, you should, you know, look around more, you should be more broad-minded. But I mean, that's the experience we have. That's what church is to us, most of us.
Well, perhaps people are analytical enough of themselves, feel somewhat uncomfortable with their place in life. And they're projecting that on church, but that is a good thing. Yeah. We should be really comfortable with where we are as people. We should be trying to be better.
Sure.
And to grow. And people, especially from a Christian background, would be, you would think, more sensitive to that.
Yeah, but the problem is people are trying to be better. Yeah. They're trying to be them. They're trying to pursue something that they think is a creative way of fulfilling the church's mission. And, you know, I counsel law firms and law firm management now. And in general, when I'm talking to law firms and law firm management, the approach is when a lawyer comes with a problem, the approach is, what can I do to get to yes? Right? I mean, that's they don't know, the management doesn't want to be the department of no. But time and time and time again, at multiple churches, I have seen churches basically function as the department of no. Anyone who objects to something, oh, well, we have to defer to that. You know, and just grinding things to some, and it's just frustrating for people, especially if they feel it's a gift or something they've been called to do. Well, what do? You leave.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think I talked to Patrick about this after I started coming to Northwest, but especially, and I don't mean to split hairs with gender, but especially with women in the Church of Christ. If you have talents and skills, you're running major corporations, you're starting small businesses, but then when you walk into the church, sit still, be quiet, or make some cookies. That's a turn. You know, I don't even bake or cook, and that was a turnoff for me. I go, well, where's my place in the church? And we're talking about creativity, and Ron just said this: our natural talents and who we are. I can't use those the way the church is set up now because the church is not allowing my creativity or who I am to be present. And as a young person striving and having ambition, I can't tell you the number of women I've counseled that's one reason they in our particular church, they don't want to be a part, is because, well, where do I fit in and how do I use the talents that God has given me?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't think you can't argue with, you know, this is what people are feeling. This is what people are, how they're responding. This is what they're seeing when they, yeah, you know, you could say, well, you know, if you just, you know, hang in there and we'll find ways. Yeah, but hanging in there is the key, isn't it? And sometimes people just can't do that anymore. You know, they just hanging in isn't really an option anymore. So how do we, you know, deal with that? How do we respond to that? Actually, this is hitting on a couple of different of the categories. So, but I think that it really fits here in this idea of our overprotectivity. If I keep our aversion to let's be open to trying some things. Let's be open to listening to each other and hearing and trying to respond to what we see. I have a tendency, I gotta admit, I have a tendency as a minister, and I'm fighting against it right now at this minute. I have a tendency as a minister to say, not this church, or not my church, or not, because I'm invested in that, and so it's hard for me to hear this kind of, but we have to be willing to put that aside and listen. It was somebody trying to make a comment. I guess not. Okay.
The church probably needs to be wary of emphasizing corporate worship as the primary expression of its talents.
Yeah.
And that is also undoubtedly something that's affecting these responses.
And that's we've certainly
so much more that we can do that we do that's outside of that. And there's a lot more room for expression outside of it, but it's not what's traditionally thought of as church activity. So yeah, if you're trying to do a whole bunch of different things in the relatively narrow confines of corporate worship, you're going to be somewhat disappointed, because that's a narrow function of the church, honestly. I know that because Scripture spends so little time on it.
Right. I remember hearing about a church in Louisville that started a ministry to a strip club, and started sitting out now. Colette, I don't know if you don't like this or not, because they sent them to the strip club. They sent women from the church to the strip club with meals for the dancers. But it was so there was still some sort of traditional roles there. But what's that? I think the men were volunteering, really, a lot of them, but they said no, we should. Right. So anyway, so an interesting sort of, and again, that's one of those things where some churches might go, no, let's don't go there. And yet, this church said, yeah, we're gonna try that. We're gonna do that. I think this idea of turning toward the world, the way. Remember when you were a young adult, you were 20, you were 25, you were turning toward the world with this excitement and with this anticipation. What am I going to be? What am I going to do? What's my life going to look like? And you're excited about that, and you're anxious about that. And if in those years the church is in any way, even accidentally, discouraging that anticipation, we've got to be careful about that. We've got to, because we can't protect our children from the world, and in fact, we shouldn't want to. We should be sending them out into the world with a strong faith, and sending them out to go about the business of being light and salt in the world. And we should have been preparing them for that all through their childhood formative years.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to note, because the impulse to protect, paradoxically, all it does is ensure that a young adult is going to build their view of the world. How do I want to say this? Their view of, you're ensuring their view of the world, of the larger issues of the world, that isn't going to come from the church.
Yeah, right.
That's all you're doing. If you're not talking about the things that matter to them and that are important, those things are out there.
Yeah.
You can't wish it away and pretend it doesn't exist. When you do that, all you do is make sure that your perspective on these things is heard, and that the Bible's perspective isn't heard.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Josh. That makes a lot of sense.
Kind of depends on what we're talking about. Like, I shouldn't have to become an exotic dancer to
Please don't
realize how dangerous the temptations can be and how difficult it can be to be a faithful Christian in a lifestyle like that. We're not required to experience everything first,
right,
in order to put it in its proper place, I would say. But our world sort of says the opposite, that experiencing everything you can, whether it's good or bad, has value.
And let's not, you know, we don't err on this by swinging the pendulum so far to the other side. There's the in the world but not of the world cliche. It's a cliche because it's been used and overused for years and years and years. There's some truth to it. There's some ways in which probably it falls a little short. But for our purposes, it works okay tonight to talk about the fact that we recognize we are a part of the world around us. And in fact, we're part of the world that God created, right? Full of people that God created in his image. And you know, so there's beauty out there because it's from God. There's things to be excited about and joyful about because it's from God. And, you know, maybe one of the things the church needs to be doing is reminding people of the beauty that's there, of the joy that's there. Matt, you play music, right? Because there's beauty in it. There's joy in it for you. Not all of it is Christian music, so to speak, but it's for you. It's an experience of joy and celebration and beauty. And our world is full of stuff like that, right? And we ought to, as we ought to, as you know, as God's people, be aware of that. And share. We'll talk more about that as we go. So let me go on to reason number 2, if we can. And again, please, if you have thoughts. The church is shallow. That's a painful one for me to hear. The second reason that young people, according to this study, depart from the church, and maybe there's some relation to the first reason too, is that something's lacking in their experience of the church as far as its relevance, its depth, its even the connection with God. 20% who left said that those who said that God seems missing from my experience at church. I mean, that's kind of an indictment. That God, fully a fifth of our young adults are walking away from church because they think God's not there. They don't experience God in any real way.
That deserves a follow-up question. What do you think it looks like?
What do you think it looks like? Sure, fair question. Yeah, fair question. What do you think it looks like?
So is the first one. If these people are shallow, what are you contrasting them with? What do you consider a deep interaction that you're not getting?
The thing that seemed to come up around all of those is the idea of relevance. Many young adults seem to walk away from church because it just doesn't seem to matter. And it doesn't seem to matter to their lives, to their careers, to the things they're doing now.
There's a hard truth that everybody has to learn, and that is that it's perfectly possible and probably easy to go through the world without church at all.
Yeah.
And you could say that if that's possible, that means church is irrelevant. No, that means you have to work harder to build the connections. Since it's possible for you to exist without it. But it's not dependent on it. If the world was dependent upon church, it would be easy. It sounds like that's kind of what people are missing.
So look at the comment here. The church conveys easy platitudes, proof texting, and formulaic slogans that fails to challenge them to deep commitment to use their passions, gifts, and abilities to God's glory. That one hurts because I'm a preacher. I'm the one who's communicating easy platitudes, proof texting, and formulaic slogans if we're doing it most often. I mean, I don't know that you can deny that sometimes that's exactly what the church does. I felt it as a young adult sometimes, that what I'm hearing has nothing to do with the real issues of life and living and moving through the world and trying to serve the Lord while I go about my business, whatever God's got me to do.
I felt that way too.
Yeah.
So this thing is the application.
Yeah.
Again, if you're thinking of church as just corporate worship, then it's going to be filled with kind of universal statements, platitudes, things that are applicable to everyone, but not specifically applicable perhaps to anyone.
Maybe some of the shallowness they're feeling then is a lack of real solid relationships with people they can walk through life with and pray with and share their struggles with.
Oh, isn't that what's missing from every phase of life? I mean, I think people leave the church oftentimes when it doesn't give them anything different from what they're getting in their daily lives.
Yeah.
If there are no good relationships there, there are no strong relationships there, they're feeling, in church, they're feeling the same loneliness that they feel everywhere else.
And even maybe more to the point, I've talked to people before who have said, I feel closer to and that I share life better with the people I work with than the people I'm worshiping the Lord with. No, days a week to 1 day a week. I mean, there's things I don't recognize.
Well, it shouldn't be 1 day a week either.
Exactly.
So this is something I've talked with like other people at college, like talk to them about. And it's kind of a unique situation because like we're at a Christian college. And so we were using that as like a metaphor. So like we can go to class and attendance is a part of our class. And like, we're not going to pass if we don't have good attendance, but you also are not going to pass a class if all you have is just your attendance. And it like, so there's an element of that in church where there's like so much focus on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and like the attendance aspect of it. But then I think also on a deeper level, this is something I see with like, especially like my grandparents' generation, there's a really strong focus on like the afterlife and what happens after we die, which is important and really, really good. But it becomes bad when it becomes kind of a replacement for also concerns about what's happening while we're on earth and like while we're here living. And especially like if you're a 20-year-old and it's like you said, like we're excited about like living the rest of our lives and also like very concerned about things that are happening on earth, whether that's racial justice or climate or economic issues. For somebody who is 65 to look at us and say, that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what happens after you die and getting, to heaven or hell. It can be really, really discouraging because it's like, I've got 60 years ahead of me where I've got to live on this earth and figure out how to do that. And I want the church to be part of figuring out how to do all those parts of my life.
And that's what I was thinking about. Thanks for sharing that. It's more like the slogans of the church. And one slogan is, you don't miss church. Another slogan is, God will take care of you. And we never get to the meat of the matter, perhaps. Never talking about the day-to-day or living life. I've shared this with Ron when I first came into Northwest, and I think he was doing a midweek on divorce. And I go, what? The Church of Christ is talking about divorce? And that piqued my interest. Like, where's this going to go?
So,
Yeah, but the fact that 50% of our marriages end in divorce, it's great to see that that's a concern of ours. And how do we help a member who walks into the church and perhaps they've gone through a divorce or they're going through a divorce? And I just thought, yay, maybe this is the place for me, because the slogans of God be with you, everything's okay in life, that message is real clear, right? We hear that resoundingly so, but we don't hear the day to day, how do I cope with this? We don't deal with it. And so I loved what was just shared, because it can be such a misleading thing to not just young people, 65-year-old people too, when they're coming and they're going through a divorce after being married for 20 years, and that's what they hear. And I've certainly worked with people like that. So thank you for your comment. And yeah, I just think we have to be careful about the slogans. That's why I used to hate Christian music years ago. I hated Christian music because it was just like everything. So we're going to make it to heaven. and it had to, and I'm talking about pop Christian music, not hymnals, but I guess that could fall in there too at some point. But anyway, it's just nice to know
Colette,
we're moving through that.
I think you make a good point, Colette, and I think I brought this up last week, and I think it's a difference between how the young generation thinks about it and say my generation is there. So, you know, we read the Bible and it says, you know, don't be a homosexual, don't be a racist, don't be blank, and you just take it for what it is, and you know, you go with it and you move on. So kind of the motto or the statements that you have, whereas I think the younger generation says, I'm not disagreeing with you with what the Bible says, but so what? Let's have a discussion about it, because I'm dealing with it every day in my life. So I can admit that racism is wrong, or I can admit that homosexuality is wrong, but how do I deal with that every day in my life? How do I deal with the people in my life that deal with that struggle that they have? They want to have a practical application of that versus just the motto of it that's that. And I think that's a struggle for us. It's even a struggle for me to talk about it that intentionally with what it is, if that makes sense. Hopefully I'm clear with that.
Oh, yeah.
Let me build on that because of what the two people said. I think a lot of times the problem is we don't recognize the problem. And we do give easy answers. You know, say there are 10 verses in the New Testament talking about what a marriage should be. I'm sorry, 10 verses do not canvas the complexities of two people living together in a married relationship. I mean, they give you some guidelines and the like, but there's more there than that. When you're dealing with somebody who's homosexual, right? Mm-hmm. The traditional approach is, well, it's wrong, so don't do it. Our kids know that's not an answer. I mean, that may be where you're trying to get to, but you're not really acknowledging the problem that person feels, how they've gotten to that place. And we do that again and again. There's a commercial right now on, I don't know, I don't watch that much TV, but I've seen this a couple of times where somebody is saying, I'm suffering from depression, and it shows a whole bunch of people saying, well, just push through it, or just pretend, and eventually it'll be okay. And the ending, after a bunch of those, the ending thing is, doesn't help, right? And I think our kids who have contact with women and treat them as professional and intellectual equals all the time, have contact in schools with gay and lesbian and bisexual and transsexual people and the like. They just see that just saying it's wrong, for us, for many people, that's the end of the conversation. For them, that's just the beginning. They just don't think we're grappling with the problem. And I'm not saying, again, you don't eventually end up where we say we are, but there's a lot of discussion along the way that we just try to short circuit by citing a Bible verse. And life's just more complicated than that. And if we can't acknowledge what people are going through, I think we are going to be seen as shallow in those respects. Acknowledging, for example, I've heard from some people, and it's not maybe the older generation, but how a woman coming to a church service where only men are permitted to talk, and sometimes a woman with a doctorate degree is being told something by a 13-year-old boy, and they have to deal with that kind of situation. It can cause a visceral reaction, and it's not an answer to say, well, you just shouldn't have that. So anyway.
I appreciate all the comments, especially going back to the comment. We want the church to be part of the solution. We want the church to be able to address these problems. I like that. I think that's really a really important statement. And I think that's where a lot of the disconnect is. Many of our young adults, they want to be a part of the church that addresses and has a response based in the gospel to these issues that we're dealing with. They just don't see it in their experience of church. And so, you know, how do we be the church our kids want us to be? I say kids because I've got a kid who's 23. You know, how do we be the church our young adults, our teenagers want us to be? I teach the teen class on Sunday mornings, and sometimes I'm like, you know, well, they really should have taught the class this morning, you know, because you know, it's really, there is an expectation that what we say is going to match, what we do is going to match what we say. Our walk is going to match our talk, and if they don't see that, it's going to be a problem. And I'm not talking about hypocrisy. I'm talking about, you know, God loves everybody, you know, but, you know, we're just not going to address this issue over here. We're just not going to talk about this issue here. We're just not going to come to any sort of understanding on this thing that is an open, festering wound for a lot of people. Anyway, I thank you. Very, very great comments, and I'm going to leave it with those comments because I think those were fantastic. Again, we're going to come back to these so don't get discouraged that we're just surfacing problems and we're not going to have anything to say about them. We're going to come back and talk about some thoughts. Not tonight, obviously, but we're going to come and talk about some thoughts. How do we move forward knowing this stuff? How do we move forward hearing this stuff? Let's do one more. This will be a real easy one. It'll go real fast. I'm sure nobody's going to have anything to say about this one. So we'll do one more tonight. Churches come across as antagonistic to science. The church is anti-science. Faith and science seem incompatible. The quote goes, as science appears to welcome questions and skepticism, while matters of faith seem impenetrable. That's an interesting thing. Science appears to welcome questions and skepticism, while faith is about, you know, these are the things we know, and we're not going to, you know, to give an inch, and we're not going to even entertain the idea that we might not have the answers on these things. They feel this tension, many young adults, between what they hear in the church and science. Christians are too confident they know all the answers, 35% say. 30% say churches are out of step with the scientific world we live in. 25% say Christianity is anti-science, nearly the same. Said they have been turned off by the creation versus evolution debate. And another one that I think this study surfaces that maybe there's not a number for, the number of young adults who are going into the sciences, they're beginning study careers in science-based settings, science-based fields, and they're struggling with how do I square what I hear in church and what I'm taught to believe the Bible says with what my research is saying and what the research of others around me is saying. How do I deal with it? So another really interesting one, I think, and one that I think I can remember as Josh was getting older and getting into the teen years and the years where, well, even before that, some of the ways I was sort of feeling around the edges as we talked about, what he was hearing in science class and versus what he was hearing in church, and was he having a conflict there, and was he struggling with that? And I was sort of trying to. I didn't feel really confident in addressing it head on, but I wanted to sort of feel around the edges and see if you were struggling with that. So I just think
it's unfortunate that things are presented as two opposing forces that way. I've heard that in church classes. And
yeah.
It ignores, on the one hand, how incredibly faith-based science is, of necessity, not just because of its historical association with the church going back centuries, but of necessity now it's based on all sorts of assumptions based on faith. And how logic-based our faith is. Paul's writings are incredibly logical, so there doesn't need to be this opposition there. They fit together.
At one point in our world, science was even sort of regarded as another way that God revealed himself in the world.
Are you saying that in past tense?
Well, I don't think that's the way often it is regarded either in the church or in the sciences today.
Yeah, that's
I believe it, and I'm
I do
deeply in
too.
the sciences.
I do too, but I don't think that's necessarily, obviously what a lot of these kids are young adults are hearing.
Public school.
Is, well, I don't know. I went to public school. Josh went to public school.
I was never told, anything negative about faith.
Yeah.
Any science.
No, but you were taught evolution. You weren't taught about God creationism. And I think it's overblown. When I was a new Christian, it was a big issue to me too. But now I can see that you can function very well in the world of science. And that is a minor, nobody's going to ask me daily what I believe about that. You can function very well with science as real.
But you said as a new Christian, it was a big issue for you.
And
as for these young adults, I think it's a big issue.
They got to get past it and see that science is real and it's true and there's nothing that.
Well, I'm not sure that the young adults think it's a big issue. I think they're told it's a big issue. We're the ones now, or not me, but Christians are oftentimes the ones making the issue now on a few, as Michelle says, it's just a few little areas. And we're picking the fight. Science has gone on without us. I mean, they're not worried about this at all. They're going to keep on pursuing how they think the world works and how all things work. And it just doesn't, what the church says is not a factor anymore. But it is sad that now, to my great surprise, right, we're even seeing, and of course it may be blown out of proportion, but we're even seeing people doubting science in the midst of a health crisis, right? And sometimes it's the pastors who are telling them that, not always, not even maybe the most of the time, but there are churches out there who are conditioning their congregants to doubt science, be skeptical of science and the like. And I don't think our kids understand that at all. I think it can be a real black mark on the church. Now, mind you, you can come to doubts of science for some other reasons as well, but using religion to do it is I think problematic. So
yeah. Just a quick comment. When I worked on OSU's campus, that was one of our big series that we taught to the college students, using science to show God's creation and how it worked. And it was such a fabulous study. And we had tons of students would come out to hear it. So I think it can be something, but it's not, this says the church is anti-science. I think that's the overarching belief about church and science, when if it's done properly, you can show that really they could be kissing cousins, faith and science.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I think there's an element of like truth seeking, and the ability to discern truth is a vital spiritual discipline. Like if I'm going to be able to trust what another Christian says, I need to be able to trust that they are good at like reading and understanding and figuring out what is real and what is not. And so like when I'm scrolling through Facebook and I'm looking at all of the members of my church who are like vaccines cause autism and masks don't work and all of this stuff that I'm like, that's scientifically just not true. It makes me doubt other things about like what they're saying in the church. And it makes me not want to bring other people in, because if they can't believe what they have to say about science and issues like that, where it seems a lot easier to prove and figure out what the truth is, why do they want to listen to what we have to say about much harder things that are to discern truth and to figure out like what life is about and stuff?
Same thing is that the process of truth seeking in both areas, faith and in science, is the same. Science used to tell us that the atom was an indivisible hard ball, because based on all the evidence that they could observe at the time, that was true.
Right.
It turned out to be completely wrong because the paradigm was wrong. And the same is true in our walk of faith. You may think, well, God is doing this and I need to be doing this. And then all of a sudden, no, the paradigm I was assuming was completely wrong. And God was actually moving me in this way. We don't see the whole plan like God does. And that goes for science and everything abstract as well.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about a lot of this stuff is I don't know. I mean, it's easy to look at it and say, this is all caricature of the church. And I think some of it is. I think some of it's not. I mean, I've seen and heard a lot too in my few years doing this. And I think it's not always caricature. But the fact is, whether it's caricature or not, this is what our young adults are hearing, believing, thinking about us, and that's a real issue, no matter whether it's caricature or not. And to some degree, maybe we've let the culture around us drive the bus too much on this, and we haven't had good responses and good ways of interacting with the world around us to put the lie to some of these caricatures that are out there.
Clearly, that's the case with this issue in particular. People think they have to fight against the secularization of science. It's a dichotomy that doesn't really exist, and it's not something we need to be doing.
I remember talking to a guy not too many years ago, talking to a guy talking about Christianity, and he said, "So you believe the world is 6,000 years old?" that was his assumption, that I believe the world was 6,000 years old because I was a Christian. Well, I don't see the world as 6,000 years old in Paul's gospel at all, right? Or in Jesus, in the Beatitudes. I don't see the world as 6,000 years old. But that was the caricature. That was the assumption that this guy had based on a lot of stuff and based on some reason. This was what he believed, and so this is what, as mature Christians, we have to recognize and come to terms with. I don't like all this, but this is what it says. This is what the results say over and over. Okay, we need to stop for tonight. It's past 8:30. Next week we will finish up with this, and hopefully, we'll finish up with this and see where we get from there. And thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody's comments. I'm glad that everybody's joined us. Natalie, Reagan, thank you for taking time to be here from Freed. And it's good to see everybody. Your mom's blowing you kisses, because that's what moms do.
Good night. I'm sorry.